later I'll be joined by Banseka, but let's just start from the top and tell you what's coming up. We've got Zach Palansky torches Koonsberg's framing, Epstein files dump, Mandelson quits, and Tommy Robinson is cheap. Musk is still a loser. And finally, Britain First Politics, billionaire money, reforms £200,000 donation exposed. But as ever, you can help us grow by visiting turnleftmedia.co.uk/support to help fund our work and also my Wi-Fi, baby, or by becoming a YouTube member. But on to our first story. So, Zach Palansky sorry, apologies. Zach Palansky appeared on the BBC yesterday with Laura Koonsberg and frankly did a fantastic job in the face of some really odd questioning. First off, Laura asked about flying.
There is a test for the Greens about whether or not you can become that really serious force with your potential eyes on number 10. One thing you've said, along with not using drink or drugs, is that you don't fly. Now, that's from an environmental position. But is it credible to say that you could actually be a candidate for high office if you wouldn't get on a plane? Would you get on a plane to go and see other leaders if you actually achieve high office?
Yes, obviously.
So you would change your position on that?
Well, if I was Prime Minister of the country or a Secretary of State and needed to do it for diplomatic reasons, I'd make sure that we looked at Zoom or Teams or whatever, first of all, a remote call. But certainly there's times where you need to be sat down with someone diplomatically. That's very different now to being leader of a party where I think flying would just be about ego.
OK.
It's kind of a gotcha here, trying to appeal to personal hypocrisy, but Zach answered this incredibly straight and to the point. One of the really good things that has come out of Zach's leadership is to focus on systemic issues rather than personal responsibility. He's made it clear that if you're a meat eater, you drive a petrol car, you're welcome in the Green Party. The party's shifting more to working class representation and leaving behind the sort of do your bit environmentalism, so much more inclusive. The biggest issue with the environment isn't personal responsibility. In fact, the carbon footprint narrative is actually a propaganda tool invented by the fossil fuel industry to push responsibility on the individual rather than the oil companies destroying this planet. Next, Koonsberg asks Zach about Gaza. Her frame of this is utterly wild, so brace yourself, but she's suggesting Zach is being divisive by opposing genocide.
You say you want to turn people's anger into hope, but you also said that you're going to make an issue of Gaza in the by-election in an area where there is a large Muslim population. Doesn't that just stir up division?
Well, I think I'm not making an issue of Gaza. We have a government that's not just complicit, but actively been arming a genocide that's been going on for years now. And I don't think it's just people who are Muslim who are concerned about this. In fact, polling shows time and time again, people are deeply unhappy, to understate it, about our government's role with the Israeli government. And so when I'm in Gorton and Denton, I'm absolutely going to be talking about the same things we've just spoken about, reducing people's bills and protecting people from an economy that's not working for them. And at the same time, you can do more than one thing at once and say we have a government that's outrageous.
Of course, but if you say you want to be a candidate to bring people together, to provide hope, you know how an important an issue Gaza is, but also how divisive an issue it can be. And you have said this week it will certainly be an element in the contest. So don't you have any concern about stirring things up? Because it might be, as you've already referenced, it might be quite a brutal, ugly by-election campaign, given everything that's in the ether.
I don't actually find it divisive. I think if you're taking money from arms companies, I can probably see why you might plant the attack line that's divisive. But what I'm actually saying is that we need peace, both for the Israeli people and the Palestinian people. I don't think that's a divisive message. I think that's a human rights message.
I think given that the majority of British people oppose what Israel's doing, this is a unifying message. Yet Laura's suggesting that opposing the mass slaughter of men, women and children is divisive. Frustrating. Finally, Koonsberg asks Zach about Keir Starmer's drug jibe against him.
Let's talk about another issue then, because the Prime Minister had a pop at you at Prime Minister's this week. He said, "You're high on drugs and soft on Putin." You called that disgraceful and disrespectful. Isn't that part of the, sometimes pretty brutal banter of Prime Minister's questions?
It's absolutely part of it, but I would note that I wasn't there to reply, so I'm glad to be on your show now, which I would argue has a bigger audience. That was beneath the office of the Prime Minister. Let's start with the drugs comment. First of all, there are thousands and thousands of unnecessary deaths from drug harm and from dangerous drugs. And actually what we need is a public health approach. That's not me saying that, that's experts who work in the National Health Service who say this just isn't working. So when I talk about legalizing drugs, the key bit is it's about legalizing and regulating. If someone has a problematic relationship to drugs, then surely the answer is to make sure they're seen by a medical health professional who can help them. But to have Keir Starmer making cheap jokes, delivered badly, by the way, from the dispatch box was pretty disgraceful.
Let's talk about drugs, shall we? Let's talk about drugs. Let's have a frank conversation about these things. The Greens have been attacked left, right, and centre quite a lot on their drug policy, mainly from the right wing and from anyone who doesn't understand what the Greens are talking about. And it's as if it's some kind of crazy idea that promotes mass crack and heroin drug taking in the streets. Adam Brooks, right wing commentator, said, "Drugs kill people, you absolute moron." But drug legalization is, of course, not about advertising drug use, but understanding that the war on drugs hasn't worked. Those who see this as a silly policy, as Brooks clearly does, have never actually engaged in the argument. In order to have an opinion, it's important to speak to experts and drug reform campaigners like we do. This is Curtis Daly speaking to Zoe Garbett, member of the London Assembly and drug reform advocate last year, on how the war on drugs has failed.
The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has said that the war on drugs failed and we need a health-based, evidence-based approach to drugs. So I do think there is that's a really incredibly important voice, I think, for anyone who says they're on the side of human rights. They know that they need to be calling out the war on drugs. The UK has become an absolute outsider on things like cannabis. We've got countries, Luxembourg, Malta, Netherlands, Germany, and many more, regulating and legalising the access to cannabis, which puts us at a complete outlier. I'm hopeful that we will start having those conversations in the UK. But I think, public health professionals talk about taking a treatment-based approach. The Carol Black really important report from 2021 said that, it showed that not only did the criminal market and have all the costs of the way that we approach drugs cost billions, almost 20 billion, and talked about, needing to take a health-focused approach and invest in treatment. And lots of people can get on board with that. People want to see people getting the help for, their drug use. But I go one step further and say that we need to look at the root causes and look at how people access those drugs and the causes of people using drugs, and then look at how people could access that through health professionals.
So I remember when that video came out last year, and it's a bloody amazing video. So I would recommend you watch it. I'm not being biased or anything. It's not because I'm part of Turn Left, but it is available on our channel, so go check it out. But let's bring Banseka in. Banseka, how do you think Zach Polanski performed against Laura Kay?
Yeah, I think he did really well, to be honest with you. You didn't show the clip of this, but there's a really underrated moment before he's being interviewed where he's juxtaposed against Steve Reed, who's like a kind of Keir Starmer ally, and there was like an ocean between them in terms of how they came across. Like, Zach Polanski comes across as clear, like cutting, you know what he's about, you remember what he actually says. Steve Reed was just like totally bland and like baffled and didn't land any messaging, and it is really like night and day now watching Zach Polanski against an awful lot of politicians, but particularly these Labour politicians. In terms of an ability to be able to communicate ideas. He talks about rent controls as well in that interview, which is exciting. It's not often that we get to hear about rent controls in sort of mainstream media as well. So I thought that was really cool. And I thought it was really funny the way he was just able to provide a very straightforward answer to the flying thing. I think Laura Kuenssberg thought, oh, I've got him, I'll get him to have to like triangulate into all these awkward things that most politicians do because they're often saying things they don't even really believe or they know aren't consistent. And he was just like, yeah, I'd fly. And I thought it was funny. It's like, she thought she got him. And he was just like, yeah, of course I would fly if I felt like I really needed to. And I thought that was like super effective. And I think I know lots of people really enjoy seeing Zach Polanski actually just answer questions. It's the bar is low, but that's a really refreshing thing in our politics, right? So I thought that was good. This line of questioning that Laura Kuenssberg follows around Gaza and the suggestion that genocide or opposing genocide is divisive, it's obviously really quite concerning. I know the British public have shifted their minds quite a lot towards a more supportive stance for Palestinians, which is great. I'm glad that's happened. That's happened over the last few years. But to be honest with you, even if it was a minority view in this country, I think there is still something quite sick and uncomfortable about sort of characterising what we know categorically by genocide experts has been called and labelled genocide. There's something really sick and horrible, I think, about referring to it as divisive. And I also noticed as well that when she cited that particular argument, she also looped in this idea that 30% or so of the constituents are Muslim. And so what she's doing is she's really insinuating that Gaza is this kind of highly sectarian issue, which is something that is mostly something that maybe Muslims or maybe British Arabs care about, but it's not really part of the mainstream. And that just runs so counter, I think, to many people's experiences now. Anyone that's gone to any of the pro-Palestine protests, I think, is always looking at a crowd of people who are multi-ethnic, multi-diverse, lots of different people from different faiths, different backgrounds and stuff. And so this idea that it's a sectarian issue, which is really just there for a small group of people and will kind of divide or alienate everyone else, it feels Islamophobic, to be quite honest with you. It feels very anti-Palestinian. It feels very blatantly Islamophobic. And I think to sort of relegate that issue as something that the Green Party is trying to do, and in a cynical attempt perhaps to secure Muslim votes at the expense of everyone else, is really awful and totally untrue as well. Also ignores the fact that you can campaign obviously on multiple things. I think the idea that the Green Party, they're not just some sort of single issue party, right? Like they're out there talking about cost of living, something that I think Reform don't really want to talk about. So yes, of course there will be some people in the constituency who don't care about Gaza or are not particularly interested, or it's not a high priority for them, but they probably care about their heating bill. They probably care about the cost of rent, and the Green Party is campaigning on a wide breadth of issues as well. So it's just a weird kind of way to characterize, I think, the Green Party sort of campaigning, and it was it was wrong. On the drugs policy area as well, like Zach Lansky's super strong on that. A lot of people made a big meal in the mainstream media about, he doesn't even take drugs and alcohol. Why does he have an opinion about it? Which I just thought was weird. But I think he's super strong on that. I think someone like Keir Starmer thinks he's really strong on the drugs policy stuff. So he keeps bringing it up and linking it to Putin. I don't really get what that's about. Sorry. Whatever, man.
Trust me.
And I think he thinks he's really strong on that because of his background as Director of Public Prosecutions in the CPS. To be honest, I think it's one of his worst areas, to be honest, because it comes across as weirdly authoritarian and draconian. To be honest with you, if you're that obsessed with law and order, you're just going to vote for the Tories or Reform anyway. So you're probably not really eating up any of those people. And then you're just alienating, Labour's core base of people. I mean, at the end of last year, he was complaining in an interview with The Observer, talking about how, the Green Party's policy would allow drugs to be sold outside schools. And it's like, that's what's happening right now, right? Like, famously, I think drugs are probably being sold outside schools right now under the current policy system that we have. That's clearly not working. So I think that was super sharp on that. And it's just really, really important. It can't be overstated that in just a few short months, the difference that there is having somebody in the mainstream media regularly who's able to propagate these more left-wing ideas. And they may get characterized as wacky or weird by the political establishment, but I think it is quite clear that even just in a few short months, he's not been party leader that long. It feels like he's been doing it for a long time in a good way, but he is doing a lot of paradigm shifting, I think, and he's forcing his political opponents to have to pivot, to have to come up with better answers. And the Labour Party, I think in particular, is really pressing them actually by having this more left-wing stance, which is very unapologetic. He's not backing down. It's forcing the Labour Party at times to have to try and meet somewhere in the middle at times on that, as much as like Morgan McSweeney and all the kind of Labour right weirdos really don't want to do that. And so I think he's performing this really important function. Obviously in the long term I would love to see a Green government. Who knows, of course, that could happen, but in the meantime he's providing this really important function through stuff like this, where he's stopping this kind of continual backslide and kowtow into these increasingly radical right-wing ideas, and that's been an immeasurably good thing for our politics, right?
Honestly, so well said, and you make a great point about the fact that Zach actually hasn't been, the leader of the Green Party for that long, but has managed to show his teeth a little bit and that aggression, and not play those lazy media games that legacy media likes to play. And that is something I really respect about him, and I hope that people can see that is what's happening. So yeah, I can't add on to that, but I'm conscious of time, and we had a little mishap at the beginning. But so I'll move on to the second story because it's a long one, guys. When I tell you, I don't even know where to start with this one. It's been a pretty explosive weekend, I think. And I don't know about you, but everything I've seen on it is pretty harrowing. Do we start with Mandelson in his underwear? Do we start with Andrew on all fours? Do we look at Musk or Branson, Tommy 10 Names and Steve Bannon? I'd like to look at Trump, but I think if I could, but we all know what that looks like. It looks very redacted. So let's start with this guy. Slimy Mandelson, pictured in Epstein's Paris flat in his underwear, who has literally just quit the Labour Party. In his letter to Holly Ridley, the General Secretary of the Labour Party, he stated, I've been further linked this weekend to the understandable furore surrounding Jeffrey Epstein, and I feel regretful and sorry about this. Allegations which I believe to be false, that he made financial payments to me 20 years ago and of which I have no record or recollection, need investigating by me. While doing this, I do not wish to cause further embarrassment to the Labour Party, and I'm therefore stepping down from membership of the party. I want to take this opportunity to repeat my apology to the women and girls whose voices should have been heard long before now. I've dedicated my life to the values and success of the Labour Party, and in taking my decision, I believe I'm acting in its best interests. I actually don't even know where to start. Firstly, what do you mean you don't wish to cause further embarrassment to the party? Was it not embarrassing enough that you were close mates with a convicted sex offender? You literally maintained ties with Jeffrey Epstein after his 2008 sex trafficking conviction. That wasn't embarrassing to you. You were forced to resign from cabinet, lest we forget, twice, both in 98 over failing to declare a £373,000 loan from a fellow minister to buy a home, and again in 2001 over allegations where you helped support an application for an Indian billionaire donor. Everything this guy stands for and stood for is an embarrassment. His nickname, can we please talk about this, is Prince of Darkness. And I'm sorry. I need to go back to the fact that he's a convicted sex offender. The absurdity speaks volumes. It wasn't the moral outrage of palling around with a paedophile that finally prompted the action, but a payment dispute that's literally just come out. And even now, Starmer let this slimy guy slip out the back door on his own terms, and only now is he saying this. He's calling for him now to be stripped of peerage. You literally couldn't make this stuff up. So wild. Manson says that he has no record or recollection of this. He believes it to be false. I mean, I don't hear a denial, do you? Was there a quid pro quo? We know that in 2003 and 2004, Epstein wired a total of 75,000, to Lord Mandelson. I won't go through this. Pause if and when you need, or go back to these and study it. But these documents released at the weekend show that he received 3 payments of $25,000 each from Epstein when he was a backbencher MP in 2003 and 2004. His partner, De Silva, also received thousands of pounds from Epstein in 2009 and 2010 when Mandelson was business secretary, the file showed. But not only do these documents show an exchange of money, but 2 documents in the Epstein file show confidential government emails being forwarded to Epstein in mid-2009. The highly sensitive document was forwarded by Mandelson to Epstein on the same day with the comment, interesting note that's gone to the PM. Epstein replies with, what salable assets? Land, property, I guess, Mandelson responded. The Labour government announced the plans for the asset sale 4 months later, suggesting that £16 billion could be raised through the disposals. The leaked material concerned live policy issues of clear financial interest Epstein and his circle, and as we know, after Labour lost power, Epstein helped Mandelson pursue a Wall Street role, with Mandelson looking to be paid more than $4 million per year. It's so messy. I mean, I don't want to talk about Andrew on all fours because I think that's an image that's etched in my brain that I wish I could get out. But I will turn my attention to Tommy, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, Britain's biggest patriot, right? A man of the people. No one rates this guy, like at all. No one in the elite circles, I think, even rates this guy either. The only people who rate him are the twats who willingly paid $25.99 on Amazon for his rubbish book, Manifesto, on the Islamic invasion in Britain that was going to replace the Judeo-Christian order. Not even Steve Bannon and the billionaire pedo like this guy and seen 40 years, a shill. In exchange between the two, it shows then bankrolling British agitator Tommy Robinson. It turns out Epstein wasn't just preying on girls, he was also preying on political grievances, scheming to funnel cash and support to Robinson's anti-Muslim crusade via Bannon's network. In the exchange, Bannon says, backbone of England, to which Epstein responds, no wonder the pound is so low. And Steve says, cheap at any price. Sorry, I don't know. You have to laugh at that. It's embarrassing. It's so embarrassing. He said cheap at any price. Come on. It's unclear from the messages whether the two were praising Robinson and criticizing Britain or taking the piss out of the far right activist. But I'm going for the latter because it literally proves that Tommy is a shill to to whoever pays him in his turkey teeth. But Robinson has spent years raging about an establishment cover-up. Now he's the one caught up in an establishment scheme. The next time he rants about grooming gangs or the elites, remember his own benefactors included a convicted paedophile and a Goldman Sachs millionaire. And there is one more that I just want us to laugh at together. I think any opportunity to not laugh at Musk is an opportunity wasted. This cannot be up for debate either, but Musk is the biggest loser going, especially when you spend your Christmas day doing this. Do you have any parties planned? Musk says. I'll be working to the edge of sanity this year, and so once my kids head home after Christmas, I really want to hit the party scene in St. Bart's or elsewhere and let loose. The invite is much appreciated, but a peaceful island experience is the opposite of what I'm looking for. To which Epstein responds, understood. I will see you on St. Barth. The ratio on my island might make Tallulah uncomfortable. To which Musk responds with, ratio is not a problem for Tallulah. Sorry, I said Tallulah. And all of this is asking, what day or night will be the wildest party? What makes this whole thing embarrassing is Epstein not responding to this guy and needing to be reminded by Leslie Groff, Epstein's assistant. Just a reminder, Elon Musk was asking about coming to your island on January 2nd, she says. There it is. But why is Elon begging it? He's completely begging it. Now, we can't prove for now that Elon went to the island and did anything illegal with Epstein, but we can say for a fact that Elon Musk is a loser who asked to go to the island of a convicted pedo to attend his wildest parties. This guy is begging a nonce about where the wildest parties are. On Christmas Day, you were begging to go. And to top it all off, Elon has repeatedly lied and said he refused and declined invitations, but several emails prove he didn't. He straight up responded yes to an invite to the island and asked about when the wildest parties were going to be in another. Everything is coming straight from you, Musk. Make it make sense. Banseka, there's so much to unpack. Firstly, I just want to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah. I'll start big picture and then I'll go down to talk about some specifics. I mean, I think there's a huge problem that the general public is going to have with actually making sense of any of this. I don't feel like we have a media class that is up to the task of helping us to understand what is a vast amount of information. You keep getting these massive dumps of information, obviously with bits and pieces redacted as well. And it's just it's so much there and you're kind of combing through it or you're seeing fragments of it on your timeline and on social media. I've actually seen an awful amount of misinformation, deliberate deep fakes. I think there were deep fakes of Zoran Mamdani's mum, holding him as a baby at a Jeffrey Epstein party that looked really real. I did have to double take and I was like, rah, really? And so I'm actually really concerned that this information has kind of been let loose, but with no kind of wraparound or remit around it whatsoever to help the public actually make sense of it and understand it at a kind of detailed and more deeper level. And I just think this probably is a huge question. It speaks to, I think, how black-pilled many people feel across the political spectrum. I think this is a cross-political thing, right? But what are even the consequences of this? And there may well be some consequences, I hope, for some specific individuals like Mandelson, I hope. But for many of the people implicated in there, it just feels like we've just got this information that there's an insinuation that they were involved in some very bad and illegal things, but nothing's going to happen. So that then kind of deepens the black-pilled feeling even more, and it deepens your sense of cynicism, and there's nowhere for that deep distrust, I suppose, between the elites who rule us and us. There's nowhere for that to kind of go, because it's I don't, what are the levers here? How are things actually going going to change. I thought it was infinitely kind of depressing. The other thing I will say as well that I was really interested in that came up a lot. I don't think it was mentioned in any of the clips that you've just shown, but I think this was something I saw a lot, which was how much race and like explicitly racial ideas seem to crop up. I mean, you mentioned like Tommy Robinson and using him as a bit of a pawn, right, to kind of further anti-Muslim ideas and stuff like that, and how that would be to the benefit of people like Jeffrey Epstein. But yeah, like some of the discussions that he's having, like there's this wild discourse he's having with fucking Noam Chomsky about how black people are less intelligent than everyone else, which is crazy and also weirdly prescient, I suppose, of where like political discourse in this country and in sort of more globally was going to be heading, right? And I suppose the interesting or the useful thing about seeing some of that and seeing some of those private conversations and the veil lifted over them is that it does really reiterate how much racism is an idea of the elites. It's not this like naturally occurring thing that happens in most people. It's not an issue with people generally. It comes top down, right? And it in no way should surprise us that somebody who believes so fervently that they could abuse for their own sexual gratification women and young girls, people who didn't consent or could not consent, it should be of no surprise, I suppose, to us really that that person also believed very fervently in racial taxonomies and in a racial hierarchy. We can see that with his support for Israel as well, which of course is an apartheid racist state as well. So I thought that was like notable. It was kind of like, oh, well, that kind of makes sense. Infinitely depressing. I suppose the other thing I'll say about this is all the Peter Mandelson stuff. It's depressing how much of this reveals just a total kind of continual ongoing legacy of like Labour fractionalism. Because there's stuff in there around where like Peter Mandelson, who's got like a government role at one point under Gordon Brown, is busy trying to like wheedle money out of Epstein for himself and is like leveraging his own position as a government minister in the UK to do so, whilst Gordon Brown's dealing with like the economic meltdown crash of like 2008, and you're busy trying to line your own pockets, and it's just, it's just, and then Mandelson is this persistent presence throughout like Labour and into the Keir Starmer years, right, as well, where again he becomes a thorn in Keir Starmer's side. We were told in 2024 that the Labour Party only wanted the highest quality candidates involved in the Labour Party, and yet here they were continuing to give, so much power and leverage to somebody who had, to put it mildly, an incredibly dodgy record already. His relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was already known to the Labour Party, and yet they kept this guy in whilst they were chucking out, left-wing candidates for liking a tweet that they said was anti-Semitic. But this guy's knee-deep in, a sex trafficking financier's emails and, financials, and apparently that was fine, or that was a risk worth taking. And so I think it does speak, and again, this is where the media, I think, may fail on this. I don't think we should think of Peter Mandelson as like a single rotten apple in the kind of Labour Party, right? Like I think he exemplifies something quite rotten about the whole kind of like Morgan McSweeney, Keir Starmer, Labour right-wing project, which is that these people all seem to be in it for themselves. There's a lack of understanding about what it means to occupy these positions because you believe in public service, you believe in public good. Someone like Gordon Brown, not quite my politics really, but I do think he was probably there for the right reasons. Someone like Peter Mandelson is just so transparently transactional and so transparently in it for himself. And the emails reveal that. This guy's basically just like, yeah, I've done my bit in politics. Now I just want to make loads of money and I'm going to make it. And I deserve to earn millions, and I'm going to do that through this guy who's doing terrible things. And so I do worry that like he'll be treated, Mandelson, as a bit of a bad apple, but actually like, to me, he exemplifies a politics in the Labour Party in particular, which is totally self-serving and is completely divorced from the public's best interests. And that's a real concern to me.
It's a really great point. And I think what's forgotten in all of this, like, we laugh about it. We laugh about, Madison's underwear, and we laugh about the fact that Tommy's still a shill and that Musk is a fucking loser. But I think what we forget about in all of this is there are victims, like the victims, the heart of all of this, victims whose testimonies are going to be completely overshadowed by these men, and where what we're seeing is that the majority of these women are recruited into this trafficking ring, essentially by the ruling class, and then the ruling class are then protected and not held accountable. We're still having conversations about Andrew, just doing what he did and not even interrogating the fact that he hasn't really been held to account. We've got Starmer who literally says, well, yeah, maybe we should get rid of the Lord in front of Mandelson's name. And it's like all of these things that should have happened a long time ago because they had associations with someone problematic should have happened. But I think these structures are built in a way that is so detrimental to believing victims and protecting victims that I see no way out of it. And I think you asked a really great and poignant question at the beginning, Banseka, and it was what's actually going to happen as a result of all of these, like this Bible that's just been dropped on us. Like, I don't know if anything will happen. Who knows? Who knows? But really great analysis. So conscious of time, but before we move on, it's 2026 and we really want this year to be big for Turn Left. Of course we do. We want better Wi-Fi for Sarah, don't we? We want to be more ambitious than last year and to really put us on the map. We'd like 2026 to be the year where we can actually have a studio and for our contributors to be paid for the work that we do. We are full-time workers in this capitalist system. Your support over the years has been amazing. We're ready to take this to the next level. We rely on small donations. So if you want to be part of a media organisation that seeks to destroy the oligarchs, then please head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There you can support us monthly on Patreon, or there is another link for a one-time contribution. You can also become a YouTube member for 99p. Right, on to our final story. Let's come back home a little bit and focus on reform. We're going to look at something that is pretty ironic in British politics. We've got the Reform Party, Tory 2.0, styling itself as the voice of the ordinary people against the elites. Yet, as we know, they have been not so quietly bankrolled by some very elite interests, including foreign billionaires and city financiers. It's a textbook example of how nationalist anti-establishment rhetoric can serve as a front for ultra-wealthy backers. The spark for this story was a report about a mysterious 200k donation to Reform. The money didn't come from a well-known tycoon or grassroots whip round. It came via a small, obscure design firm in Potter's Bar. Where is Potter's Bar, you ask? Well, if you're anything like me, I had to Google it. I didn't know where it was. It's in Hertfordshire, if you're interested. But anyways, the Times revealed that this guy, John Richard Simpson, a 59-year-old conveyancer and Anglican church warden from Potter's Bar, it was his firm that made the donations last year, but he refused to discuss the source of the funds or his ties to wealthy allies of Farage when approached by reporters. Sorry, who is he? Who is this guy? This firm, Interior Architecture Landscape, had almost no public profile. It's so random. Only later did it emerge that in years past, it was listed as working for a property linked to the sorry, I'm going to hopefully not butcher this name. The Gandhari family. Hopefully I've said that. And if you don't know who they are a highly secretive billionaire clan who, according to our very own Lewis Aaron, who did his own investigation, are high risk and have links to oligarchs and the Soviet Union. Back in 2008, the Times were approached by a former KGB spy, where it was revealed that this family, the Gandhari family, secretly owns a £50 million home that was used as a front for the president of Kazakhstan, who is a massive oligarch. Fast forward to 2022, and then it later got found out that the Kazakh leader owned billions of pounds of property in the UK secretly. Our wonderful Lewis Aaron even read through the court documents of the McMafia case, which finished in 2020. And there was a transaction between the former son-in-law of the Kazakh president and the Gandhari family for around £14 million. So, how does our very own Farage actually come into this? Well, that same family's $10 billion trust just so happened to host and pay for Nigel Farage's trip to Davos last month. Nigel Farage's trip to Davos hosted and paid for by Family Trust of Billionaire. Trust says Reform UK leader was invited to the World Economic Forum event by London-based venture capitalists as an honorary advisor. A company with the Gandhari family ties funnels 200k to Reform UK. Simultaneously, the Gandhari, oh my God, their name, I actually can't say it. Gandharis? Bankroll Farage hobnobbing at the World Economic Forum, the very globalist gathering that he publicly scorns. Remember this tweet back in 2020, Nigel? The nation state run on democratic lines is much better than a small elite deciding our futures in places like Davos. And then here he is, Here he is in Davos. Farage spent years railing against Davos elites, yet there he was this year, listed as an honorary advisor to the Gandari family office with his fees and hotel paid by the billionaire trust. The cognitive dissonance is off the charts. So all of this is shady, but it's not illegal. It is crazy to think getting a mortgage has harsher money laundering checks than donating to a political party in Britain. The man whose political persona is built on snarling at globalist institutions turns up at Davos under the shelter of a billionaire structure. Let that sink in. Farage and Reform claim to fight elites and stand for British common folk, but here they are taking six-figure checks routed through shell companies, enjoying lavish support from foreign-born billionaires. It would be comical if it weren't so bloody dangerous. But this isn't just one rogue donation either. Just a few months ago, it was revealed that Reform received a jaw-dropping £10.2 million in donations in one quarter, almost 4 times the donations of the Labour Party and double the Conservative intake. And who supplied this then? You got this guy, Christopher Harbin, a hedge fund and crypto magnate based in Thailand, who poured £9 million into Reform and made a fortune in global finance. He even took a Thai name after decades overseas. Whilst we're tracking the money, another big donor, the mother of Farage's aide, George Cottrell, aristocrat Fiona Cottrell, gave £750,000, who, lest we forget, can we just remind ourselves of who George is, was arrested when he was convicted in the US and then spent 8 months in an American jail after being accused of offering money laundering services on the dark web. He served time for a single count of wire fraud, then 20 other charges were dropped as part of a plea deal. And let's not forget this guy, Lord Anthony Bamford, the billionaire JCB tycoon and Tory donor, quietly cut a 200k cheque to Reform last year, matching what he gave the Tories. Farage is managing to unite elites, just not in the way that his voters imagined. What we see is a complete paradox of populism, a party screaming establishment betrayal whilst being bankrolled by sections of that very establishment. Farage's movement is essentially a vehicle for rival oligarchs who fell out with the current Tory leadership or just have niche interests and see reform as a good investment. But what really pisses me off about this whole thing is that Britain's rules make it uniquely easy for this sort of stuff to happen. Our politics is awash in opaque donations, and as long as you're a permissible donor on paper, you can donate unlimited sums, no questions asked about true source. And that's how we end up with scenarios like the Potters Bar church warden fronting a massive gift that likely originated overseas, all perfectly legal because the last link was a UK entity. So I think the one thing that we can take away from this is that voters who support reform in hopes of sticking it to the elites deserve to know whose interests they're really advancing. It's beyond hilarious that Farage, who loves to pose with a pint in the pub, as I always say, as I am Mr. Anti-Establishment, spends his off-camera time jetting to Davos, courted by billionaire patrons and cashing checks from family dynasties with private jets and mansions. Banseka, I'm eager to hear your thoughts on this, because what do you make of the blatant contradiction? A party that claims to fight elites yet is somehow funded by billionaires, some who aren't even based in the UK. It's hardly surprising, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it might be further sort of evidence of like the yankification of our politics and our political system, because these are, for British politics, I think some of these sums of money that you quoted are really quite big. And obviously, for a long time in the US, money in politics has been a huge issue. Again, something that people across the political spectrum actually have cared about. Republican voters in the US cared almost as much, pretty much as Democrat voters did about, how much large sums of money have infected their politics, and how money, big money can buy political parties and politicians, right? So, reform, it's weird. They're like this weird, like Schrodinger's cat of a political party now. Like, they're both simultaneously anti-establishment, whilst also so obviously being completely steeped in the interests of wealthy elites, right? And it's a contradiction, but it's a contradiction so far that they seem to be getting away with, I think, for a variety of reasons, right? It's a total joke, for example, that someone like Matt Goodwin, who's running in that Greater Manchester constituency election race, he wrote a book. It was terrible. It was all about how the real elites are cultural elites, so-called the graduate class and academics, and now he's campaigning as a reform candidate in that constituency, presumably being funded almost entirely by wealthy individuals. So it suits his narrative, I suppose, and his grift to be able to tell people that you know, the real elites are graduates. You know, the money that political parties get from wealthy donors, individuals, big corporates, you know, it's not free money, is it? You know, these people are not being philanthropic, they're not being nice, you know, they're not just offloading, you know, a cool few million here and there just for the hell of it, or just randomly. You know, for these people, their donations are an investment. They're not stupid. It's an investment. It's an investment in a political party that will fight for their financial interests and for their wealth interests and for their material interests, which is all jammy except for the fact that their material interests are completely antithetical to everyone else's. So it's a bit of a fuck up for the public interest, right? And it's so obvious as well. I have to say, when you listen to Reform talk on the economy, which they don't like to do that much. They quite like talking about the culture stuff and migration and keeping economic arguments quite tightly wrapped around migration, which is what Matt Goodman, for example, is trying to do in that Manchester constituency race. You know, once you get them off there and you get them talking about pure economics, a lot of what they believe in seems to boil down to basically like Thatcherite politics, you know, kind of resurrecting essentially like neoliberalism, except there's nothing to sell off and privatize anymore. You know, they're promising a shrinking welfare, cutting the state. They say they'll cut taxes for working people, but as we've already seen with some of these reform councils, they're not going to do that. The only tax cuts that they'll probably be able to manage if they get into government are going to be nice, juicy tax cuts for the people, of course, who funded them. And so it'll be interesting, I suppose, to see as time goes on, you know, how much this impacts Reform's voter base. I'd be very interested to know how much they care at the moment about that, or whether that bothers them or not. I mean, there was some really interesting data just on how much Reform voters care about, you know, having previous Tories like just join the party, people like Robert Jenrick, Suella Braverman, and a lot of them were surprisingly transactional actually about it, and they didn't seem to mind too much. So I'd be very interested and curious to know how much they care about big money and wealth being, you know, funneled into their party, and whether or not that will become a problem for them. I think Donald Trump in the US kind of got around it by saying, I'm a businessman, I do big deals, I'm self-funded, which is also kind of a lie. They've accepted plenty of big corporate money as well. But yeah, it'll be interesting, I suppose, to see for how long this contradiction can carry on. Because Nigel Farage, as an individual as well, I don't think he pretends to be like working class. He doesn't do that whole I'm a toolmaker thing that Keir Starmer tries to do, which is obviously inauthentic. So in a sense, he hides in plain sight. Like, he doesn't pretend that he hasn't been successful, he hasn't made money, he doesn't pretend that he's not like a little bit posh coded, but he also then can weirdly then lean more authentically for some people into being anti-establishment and anti, I suppose, government, or the liberal elites have let you down. And it's a contradiction for sure, but it's a contradiction for some reason that they are able to continue holding. I suppose the question will be for how long.
Really, really well said, Banseka. I think you're probably right. Actually, they don't pretend to be working class, but I think what tends to happen is there is an implication made, like they might imply a commonality when they enter into spaces that, or third spaces that are generally dominated by working class people. So if you see, you know, the little photo ops with the hard hats, or, you know, Bojo with his pint, or Farage with his pint, you think, oh my god, a man of the people. He loves a little, you know, bevy. But I completely agree with you. I think that the issue is that they posit as anti-establishment, but when you really trace the money, they're not anti-establishment at all. But I'm conscious of time and the fact that I had a little mishap with my tech. So let's go to the comments. And I think you guys have probably guessed who the producer is. It's not me because I'm on screen.
Hello. I wonder if people did guess. I think some people did guess it was me.
It's correct.
It's Curtis.
Correct.
I tell you what, it has been a fantastic show. Of course, Sarah, you're always amazing, but Banseka, you are incredible. We love your analysis, and it's been fantastic. But we're going to go through the comments and obviously the donations too. Now, let me bring up the donos first.
The donos.
The donos. Michael says, £2 for the Wi-Fi meter. Thank you for the £2. But it might be a laptop issue. Tell us what happened. Tell us what happened.
Let me just say, my laptop sounded like it was going to take off to Davos itself. Like, it literally was like, I actually thought it was going to, like, I was so scared. And then I was like, okay, I have to just restart it. But I will say I did have internet issues. I can normally have an internet thing in this room, but I was contacting Sky and it's hard to contact Sky. Like, I don't know what's going on. Anyway, I'm back. So it worked, but I'm hoping that the laptop is not going to.
I mean, I messaged you and I said that's what happens when you get a HP laptop.
Yeah, so, guys, I refuse to get Apple. I'm a HP girly. I love it.
CPND, very, very generous with a 20 turn left membership. Thank you so much. You're an absolute hero. Of course, your donations mean a lot. Specs, again, dropping 5 turn left memberships. It's so appreciative because we're not corporate backed. The good globalist with 5 turn left memberships. Thank you so much.
Maybe that guy in Potter's Barn can give you a cool meal.
And Leonard, thank you so much. Reform aren't anti-establishment, they are anti-statist. Small distinction, big impact on the working class with the £5 donation. It's obviously true that Reform aren't anti-establishment, but they've duped a lot of people into thinking they're anti-establishment. And I wanted to quickly touch upon what Banseka said during the show. And I think you are 100% correct on Nigel Farage. And this is something liberals get wrong, which is that liberals will say, oh, Nigel Farage has managed to convince the people that he is a working class warrior, a man of the people. No, you're wrong. People know he's not working class. People know he's not a man of the people. People know he's kind of an asshole, but people are like, we are sick and tired of the old party system and we're willing to give this asshole a go. So when you see, look, Led by Donkeys, I think they do some good work. I think some of the work is really lacking. And I've criticized Led by Donkeys a lot. And one of them is, you know, they did a campaign video where they went to Clacton and put up a projection of Nigel Farage's wealth and different jobs, as if people are going to turn around and be like, oh my God, he's really, really rich. I hate him now. People know that Farage is rich. People know he takes loads of money from different jobs and they don't care because, and this is again what Banseka said, is I think a lot of people have been confused about what anti-establishment is. And it's very much of the libertarian bent, which is anti-government and that's it. That, you know, it's like, oh, we don't care about corporate power, we just hate the government. And the right wing have managed to really successfully tell the people the problem is the liberal elite, backed by the civil service, backed by civil servants, backed by organizations, human rights organizations, NGOs, quangos, and the state. And of course, they're trying to say free market capitalism, the CEOs, the billionaires, they're the real anti-establishment people because they're taking on the government. Of course, that's a lot of baloney, but that's why it's really difficult to assume that someone who's anti-establishment is automatically leftist. Once upon a time, that was kind of the case, but the right wing has done populism very well, where if we on the left now argue for higher taxes on the rich, and we say we need more public service or public or social programs, once upon a time, it's a lot easier because people were like, oh, that's great. Now it's like, oh, you want more government control, do ya? So, like, free market capitalism has been redefined as anti-establishment.
Yeah,
that was well said. I agree.
And like, I think that that Led by Donkeys thing, I can totally see why people just look at that and be like, okay. I think the TUC did like a better video where they just showed people his voting record, and then people were a bit like, oh, it's probably a bit more effective to cut through on the faux anti-establishment stuff.
Yeah, because you get people say, oh, like, good for him, you know. I hear that a lot. Like, good for Nigel. He's made money. What, are you anti-wealth?
Yeah.
And I don't think it's good enough to simply say that he's rich. I think it's important, you know, and us actual leftists, by the way, try and point out that if you have so much wealth, it equals power, and that means that power is over you. Do you want me to carry on the comments? Yeah, sorry, I sort of took over there.
No,
apologies. Let's see what we've got up next. next. Okay, so Michael says, imagine a prime minister who actually answers questions. This is in reference to the first story with Zach Polanski. It's true,
Yeah.
isn't it?
He answers questions. He does. He's so direct. Like there's no like willy-nilliness that comes with the way that he approaches things. I feel like he's so matter of fact, and that's what we need. We need that. I agree.
Yeah. And like, there's so many people in politics who ultimately just don't really believe what they say. So they spend so much time triangulating and doing this massive kind of like weird mental gymnastics to try and say what they say that people can obviously just see completely through. And it's just, in so many ways, this is why it's easier just to be in politics, maybe because you actually fucking believe what you're saying rather than just for the sake of craving, power and influence, like these Mandelson types and some of these Labour right types and some of the people who've attached themselves to this Labour right project, which is a dead project walking, I think, in many ways. So yeah, it's super refreshing. It's sad. That shouldn't be refreshing to see some question. Actually, bog standard, like just par for the course. But good for Zach. I mean, hopefully that will stand the Greens in good stead.
A lot of people would say that Nigel Farage answers questions. So what would you say to that? He's honest. No, surely. He says it as it is.
But does he? But I find maybe this is just where my bias is coming through. I just find Zach to be so much more honest. I think there's a difference between saying things how it is to gain political points and actually saying it how it is because you genuinely believe what you're saying. I don't think that Farage is, obviously he's not sincere, but I don't think he actually believes in the things that he's saying. I think it is just this political point scoring BS that he's trying to do. So I don't know if that's a distinct difference between the two, but they both have the same aggression. They're both very matter of fact, but I think one's definitely rooted in truth and one is not. That's how I view it.
What Banseka, what are your thoughts? People will say, Donald Trump, he's crass, but he says it as it is. Nigel Farage says it as it is. Even people said that Boris Johnson said the truth. Of course, we're biased because we're on the left. We will say these guys are lying. Zach Polanski says it as it is. But then people on the right will be like, well, no, Nigel Farage, Donald Trump, they say it is, and Zach Polanski's full of shit. So obviously both sides have that element of populism. But what would you say to someone who's watching this who isn't left-wing, kind of buys into Nigel Farage? Instead of just saying, oh, well, he's lying, what would you say to someone who says to you, but I believe Nigel Farage, I think he says that he's not politically correct?
I think he believes a lot of what he says. Like, I think so. There is a level of authenticity to him in that I think he believes most of the policy positions that they come out with reform. I don't think he's triangulating in that sense. I mean, some of the broader political messaging about being anti-elite and stuff like that, there is a level of triangulation. But I think most of the policy positions that he comes out with, he probably believes and buys into. And so I think there probably is a level of honesty. This guy's basically just a fact, right? When you boil down like most of reforms, like actual economic policy positions, that's kind of what it is, right? And so I think there is a level of honesty to him which I think cuts through. I do think we have seen times where he's had to triangulate a bit, like when he was being grilled on some of the stuff about all the racism stuff from school. That was probably the first time in a while where I was like, oh, he's shucking and jiving a little bit here to try and sort of get out of this without actually admitting he did anything, but also sort of saying, yeah, I did do that stuff, but whatever. And so, yeah, I think there is a level of honesty to Nigel Farage. I think the people who have the biggest issue with this, I think, are the Labour Party, because it's full to the brim of people who essentially believe in nothing. They don't believe in anything. It's just a cohort of people who, many of whom don't seem to have any kind of actual background in activism, politics, campaigning, nothing, who just thought, oh, Keir Starmer, he's a sensible grown-up, I'll attach myself to him and I'll be selected because I'm not really going to argue or fight back in this party, I'm just going to do what I'm told. Those people, I think, have to triangulate the most, and they come across as the most dishonest because I don't think they come to the table with anything. Nigel Farage comes with a vision of the world and a certain kind of diagnosis of the world and its problems, which I think are abysmal. I think his vision is terrible, but he's got a vision. He's got a kind of framework that he's working with. A lot of the Labour Party, they don't have anything. They don't have jack shit. They're not working with anything other than just, oh, well, Keir Starmer seems like a sensible prime minister, so I want to work for him. And that's why they got selected. And then they have to defend suddenly some really awful things.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with your point on the Labour Party. I think the one thing I just would like maybe push back on slightly is that I genuinely don't think that Farage believes in the things that he says. I think what he sees is an opportunity to grift. Like I genuinely I put I put him in the agitator category, like the agitator category where he's like, what can I say that will pivot people's attention away from their, or make them like they understand that the material conditions are shit, but where can they point the blame? And I think like when you see his grift, like with the story that we had today, and he analyzed like so wonderfully, like the him just getting these insane donations coming through. I think he appeals to those sorts of people who see that, oh, I think that if I invest in this party, there is an opportunity for I don't know, grifting through culture wars and grifting through I don't know, distraction. I don't know. I think what would happen is that, say hypothetically Reform did get into power and Nigel Farage was our prime minister, we would see, I think, what's happened with the Labour Party, U-turn central, so I don't see much of a difference between the Labour Party because they've shifted so far. You know, they've tried to appeal to those on the right because the Overton was so shifted, and Farage trying to do the same thing if he ever got into power, but I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I don't really know where I stand with Nigel Farage anymore. I think once upon a time I would have said he absolutely believes in everything he says, and I do think to an extent there's a lot of things he does believe in. I used to think that I disagreed with him on immigration, but he does believe in that. However, and I think ironically this was a Led by Donkeys piece, but it was a really good one, in which they exposed Nigel Farage trying to get visas for very rich people and working with capital companies to try and get rich people to come to the country. And you just think he always talks about immigration. He wants it harder for people to come to this country. And yet here he is trying to work with big companies to try and make the flow, and I won't say the flow of labour, I'll say the flow of capital, because these people aren't in the labour classes. So this guy is against working class immigration, but he's not against immigration full stop, because he wants rich people to come and to go to and from this country. And I sort of remember back to a time when someone I used to campaign with, it was when I campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn to be Labour leader, George Eilert. He made a really good point about the EU in terms of freedom of movement. And he said, I kind of at one point understood stopping freedom of movement because, of course, freedom of movement from the EU wasn't designed for people to travel. It was obviously designed for the free movement of capital. So he did say, I understand the argument that maybe that freedom of movement could end. However, he changed his mind, or at least then said, you know what, I support freedom of movement because there's freedom of movement for the rich. So if I were to argue against freedom of movement, then all I'm arguing for is against freedom of movement for the working class. And I think this could be a very good way of having an argument based on borders. A lot of people would say, oh, you know, stricter borders, I thought that was an old left-wing idea. And I understand the concerns of borders and immigration for people, but I think the best thing to say is, I get what you're saying, but the rich have open borders. So if you're wanting, if you're wanting strict immigration, all we're really asking for is strict immigration on the working class, not the very richest, because the richest can do whatever the fuck they want.
But I think that's entirely in keeping with neoliberal thinking and
yes,
yeah,
all about people like economists like Hayek or Enoch Powell. That I think Nigel Farage does see himself as somewhat Powellian, or however you call it. I think he sees himself somewhat etched in sort of Powell's shadow. You know, they were hugely fixated on this idea of like strong borders versus like open borders for flow of capital, right, and flow of trade. They were particularly fixated on this idea that we can't have people from the colonies coming here because they won't really fit into a market society, which we think is the ideal. So I feel like I'm defending Nigel Farage by this. Obviously, I'm not.
You're not, no, of course.
I think him thinking that and doing those things is really totally in line with that neoliberal tradition, which has always been totally riddled with these contradictions. You know, why would you talk about openness for trade and openness for capital, but suddenly when it's borders, it's a different story, and when it's borders with particular countries, a particular culture, races, then it's very different, and then you put class into that, rightly speaking, as well. So I don't know. I think he's maybe just following it in the political tradition that he might genuinely in here believe. Always a great lad.
Yeah. Andrina, with 5 turn left memberships. Thank you so much. Let's go on to our comments. Oh, who's that 93 says, loving the nails, Sarah.
Thank you, they're cat eye.
I don't even know what cat eye means. Is that a colour?
Oh, God.
Oh, my girlfriend is very happy hearing that, probably. What is it? No, tell me.
Cat's eye, like, you can't see it, but, like, basically, when you do this, it changes, like, colour.
Oh, you could have just said two-tone and my tiny brain would have understood that.
Two-tone, please. It's cat eye.
On to the question from Laura Koonsberg in terms of Gaza. Michael says, so divisive, not wanting a genocide. And if you support genocide, I want us divided. What an insane question from Laura K, saying, well, actually, if you bring up the topic of Gaza, is that not a bit divisive? And I just think, okay, well, divisive in terms of someone supports genocide and someone's against it, that kind of divisiveness, which, to be fair, there are a lot of people who support this genocide. But I do know that when polled, the British people are largely against Israel. It's just an insane question, isn't it?
It's stupid.
You can say that about anything. So, like, every issue then is divisive because there's clearly going to be some people who are pro this and some people are against. So why is it only Gaza gets characterized in that way as
Good
divisive?
point.
But I don't know, like the cost of living, that's not divisive.
Yeah, but I find this so irritating because when the world watched Ukraine get invaded and still is, like, we were told that silence was complicity, and then when like that if you're neutral in that situation, then you're complicit with an enemy. And then I think we were urged to stand like with the victims, as we should, to oppose war crimes, to name the aggressor, rightly so. But now, like, it's when it's flipped, when Palestinians are being killed at a staggering pace, thousands of them being children, suddenly that clarity kind of just evaporates into thin air. And I don't quite understand that. Like, why is asking for accountability seen as so inflammatory? Like, and is so polarizing and so divisive. I don't understand that at all.
I think, Banseka, I think you're right in terms of like it's divisive because what Laura Koonsberg is getting at is, oh, this is sectarian and you're basically doing a policy for Muslims. That's what she means by it, because every policy technically is divisive, right? I mean, it could have been free school meals. Unfortunately, that is kind of divisive because there's a lot of people who think, oh, my taxpayers' money should go on that. It shouldn't be divisive, but it is. So it's really odd that she decides to deploy that argument when it comes to Gaza, because ultimately she thinks, oh, is it divisive because you're trying to appease Muslims and upsetting Jews? And I think, and again, I'm not in Laura Koonsberg's head. This is just the way I see it. I could be completely wrong, but based on the way I see a lot of pro-Israel people act and the way they speak, it sounds like that if you're against the genocide, you're on the side of the Muslims. And if you support what Israel's doing, you're on the side of Jewish people, which in of itself is anti-Semitic because you're conflicted with Jewish people with Israel. There is nothing divisive about being against genocide. Like, it's against people being killed. Everyone agrees that shouldn't be the case, or most people. So I think you're right. It wouldn't be deployed anywhere else. But I do think the implicit sort of underlying message is what you're really doing is trying to appeal to Muslims at the behest of Jewish people, which is crazy.
But I think, like, fuck it, I want that division. Like, if us being against genocide divides us from those who are okay with it, then please, I want to be far away from those people. I will consistently stand on the side of the oppressed, and I will stick with that. Like, if you think that I'm being divisive in that approach, then so be it. But you're so right with Banseka's point and your point, Curtis, and also just kind of seeing through Laura's bullshit, that it is just kind of are you just trying to appeal to Muslims?
Rachel Atwood says Curtis is ridiculously straight, and sorry, it's a flaw of mine. There are so many things that you reference, Sarah, and I don't understand. Look, I'm learning to be more queer, but it's difficult, right? It's hard for us straights.
Oh, that is so funny. No, I can't. I just remember something Lewis said, like when the big light was on once. He was like, the big light being on is such
I put the big light on a lot, but it's so dark in the room, so I smash on the big light, and then my girlfriend comes in, she's like, this is disgusting.
I can't go.
Benji here comes with a personal story. I lost my best friend to heroin in September. It was his first time using as well. I'm so glad Zach had this stance. Thank you for sharing your personal story, and I'm really sorry to hear about your best friend. But I think it's really important because a lot of people who push back on the Green Party's drug policy do it in the way of saying, well, drugs kill people. You're such a maniac, crazy person who wants to legalize drugs. They pretend they're sort of concerned. And I remember a debate between Zach Polanski and it might have been Andrea Jenkins, where they were talking about this. And Andrea Jenkins was kind of being really dismissive. And a caller, called up the show and said, I know many people, or I know people who've died from this. Thank you, Zach, for speaking up. And Benji here, who has experience of losing someone to drugs, is saying, I'm glad, Zach, to hear a stance. I'm glad to hear Zach's stance even.
Yeah, those lived experiences, I think, are so important to put out there, because I think a lot of the time people are speaking from the sidelines and don't quite understand what it means to struggle with addiction, to struggle in that realm of things, for kids to be on county lines. Like, I think a lot of it is spoken from a place of privilege and not from a place of actually listening to people who are immersed in that world. So I think Zach is doing a great job, and I'm sorry to hear that, Benji, but thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and just to add, like, I think those personal stories, a lot of the time when we're on the left, right, we think in big macro terms, right? Macro ways, because we're thinking about big things like structures and systems, but it is also really immeasurably helpful to be brought back down to those individual stories, because there is a individual cost to this so-called war on drugs that doesn't work and doesn't help people and doesn't allow people to live better, healthier lives, and it's really important that we hear those stories. That's not a story I think we're going to hear on like Laura Koonsberg's Sunday Shit Show or whatever, like, but we should hear it, because those stories, individual stories, do tell us a lot really about what's going wrong and what's at stake.
Last two comments. Edward Sexby says, are the Epstein files going to be the basis of the evidence against the ruling class that we use at the post-revolutionary equivalent of the Nuremberg trials? Is this going to bring down people in power, or do you think it's kind of another Panama Papers thing? We're like, oh my God, look at all these tax-dodging elites, and no one did fuck all.
No. But do you see anyone in cuffs? Like, these Epstein files have been coming out for a very long time. There have been no hearings, like no inquiries, just redactions. That's all I've been seeing. Redactions happening left, right, and center. Like, it's concerning. You see resignations, you see reputational damage control, but the only person in jail is Maxwell. And even her conviction was for trafficking minors to nobody in particular. So Epstein is dead. The rest are at large. They're at lunch. They're at Davos. Like, will these files become the basis for real accountability? I don't know. I think it hits on the core problem with how power works today, because the truth alone, we know, is not enough. It's not enough. It's not enough. And I again, I think we're still forgetting about the fact there were kids involved in this, girls involved in this, young women involved in this, like people, legitimate victims who are involved in this, and their testimonies are being absolutely like glossed over because of a system that seeks to protect the elite.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point as well, like, I'm only in my early 30s, and I feel like I've lived through so many institutional scandals.
Our generation is cursed.
Like, there's obviously the banking crisis in 2008. Fuck all happens after that. Maybe one banker goes to jail. One. You've got the media crisis of the phone hacking scandal. Nothing really happens with that. Most people get away scot-free, or just go into the join the government of the day, or become fucking podcasters or whatever, or go into crisis management. Then you've got Panama Papers that you just said, Curtis, same thing. Like, nothing happens. So I'm trying. It's my New Year's resolution of mine to be less black-pilled and less depressed about everything, because of course we have to believe we have to have an imagination that things could be different and things could change. But it becomes very difficult, I think, once you've gone through the cycle, this rinse and repeat of these scandals, where it's like, oh my God, and then it just kind of gets all reduced down to zero consequence. It does become difficult to believe that anything is going to change. But we're living in a world that is fast changing. You know,
Mm.
things are moving, things are shifting and jiving. I don't know. Maybe sometime in the future. I mean, I think that even with Gaza as well, and that's another thing where it's like, who's going to pay for this? You know, what are the consequences of this monumental, abysmal thing that has, you know, sort of scarred the human race, really? So I want to be optimistic, but at the same time, I think lots of people my age at this point, we've seen so many scandals just get disastrous, nothing, and it does get hard to believe that this time it will be different.
The older I get, I start to see like how accountability just doesn't seem to happen. Like the most heinous things happen in front of us, and no one gets held to account. It's a really cynical thing, but we see it all the time. You know, you think the scandals that come out from particular people, that get away with it because they have the wealth and power, and it's frustrating. Before we close out, just want to bring this one up from Leonard again, or Leonard. Sorry, I just call you Leo. Curtis, I'm a gay trans man. I didn't know about the nail thing. Justice for Curtis, right? That's fucking justice.
No, justice for Sarah, because you don't know about cat eye. Like, come on.
I mean, your nails are lovely. How about that?
So much. Thank you. Yeah.
And quickly from Michael, off topic, but out of all of the YouTube lives, Turn Left generally has the best chat. I agree.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. A really great community.
All right, I'm going to hand back to you. Once again, fantastic show. Thank you for the donations and great chat.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Honestly, massive shout out to the whole community. Turn Left community is just so incredible. But huge shout outs to Banseka coming today and dealing with all of the ordeal that we had at the beginning. But also, your analysis is just so wonderfully put every single time. I love your insight. You are incredible, Banseka. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
Thank you. So that concludes Monday's show. I'm really grateful that you guys still stuck with me. I'm hoping that we can you're still character building. I think tech issues is a character building thing, and I'm glad we're in it together. But with that, please don't forget to help us out if you can, whether that's, you know, monetary wise or just by liking and sharing the stream, the videos that come out, commenting. I think that is just so priceless too. Your presence is something that we don't overlook. But you've been watching Turn Left Media's Normal Island show with episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I hope you guys have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you guys soon.